In order for our citizens to want to stay here and do what they do well, which is help each other and solve problems and hopefully build businesses and create opportunity for their fellow citizens to have jobs and to work together, et cetera, make sure that we are competitive as a city and enable the people that want to be here to stay here.
So Chris, I have actually been wanting to talk to you about Chicago politics for a long while now. And I think the timing's really good because we're like in the most contentious election cycle in American history since maybe Abraham Lincoln or something, literally. And Chicago's got a lot going on right now. But I've noticed that technology investors and tech entrepreneurs are becoming a lot more politically active lately. You may know Lee Edwards over at Root Ventures. I talked to him last week about San Francisco politics. And then you're seeing like Jason Calacanis and David Sachs and Chamath and David Friedberg are making their focus politics and even hosting political actors. I don't know if Lex Friedman cares about politics. I don't think he does, but geez, it gets talked a lot on his podcast. And then all the Twitter action. So I think where we could start is just kind of introduce to the audience what you're doing in the tech world and why entrepreneurship is so important to you. And then we can get into Chicago life.
Awesome. Great chatting, Chris. It's been several years now of us getting to know each other, starting way back in the fun clubhouse days.
Yes.
During the depths of COVID. And then you moving to Chicago and us being able to build an IRL relationship, which is fun. I'll go as quick as I can, but give me a signal because I can go on. I've got a lot of weird stuff that I do.
Cool.
I've been in tech for 30 years or so, since I was in college and in the early days of the internet, building web pages and setting up parents' friends on the internet, having no idea what it was. Shortly after graduating school, I moved out west to work with my cousin to start one of the first e-commerce platforms. And we raised our first capital from Benchmark, and Bill Gurley joined the board there. That was an interesting experience. We powered huge online retailers like Target and Overstock and BJ's Wholesale, MTV, these big guys. Did that for like a decade, then left that and had a couple other companies and projects that I was working on between that and before coming back to Chicago and working in our family commercial real estate business. But along this entire path, I was doing little bits of angel investing. I did my first angel investment ever when I was 23 years old in 1998, and did about a half dozen between then and moving back to Chicago. So it was really more me operating. But I had dabbled a little bit. And in 2013, when I got back here working in our family real estate business, I started realizing that there were some really awesome founders here that were building businesses with revenue and customers and raising at reasonable and rational valuations, as opposed to what I always thought was pretty irrational on the coasts. So I wouldn't call them discounted. I would call them just rational. I think the rest of the world is now starting to catch up to where we've been in Chicago and the Midwest now. But so I started doing some of these angel investments on the side while I was trying to learn our real estate business. A little bit of trivia. My father brought lofts, like loft office space, from New York to Chicago in the 60s. And nice. The name of his company was called Loft Development Corporation. That's what I was working in. So when I started making these Chicago-focused angel investments, I decided to create an LLC to put them in called Lofty Ventures. And that's where the name Lofty came from. I thought it was a cool name because it was A, a hat tip to my dad, but B, also look for founders that are solving lofty problems. Sweet. And my idea initially was I'll do some angel investing on the side, and I will only make investments if they're Chicago-based, because they don't have to, but they could potentially also be a tenant in our building if they're in Chicago. Yeah. If they're not, then they can't be. So there was a potential for a 2-for-1, and that turned into a really there was a lot of great positive externalities that came out of that. One of the interesting ones was I actually did an in-kind investment through Office Space, and that company was fortunately or unfortunately, the only company I did an in-kind investment through Office Space with, and they ended up exiting for $100 million. I was in their only 2 rounds. So that was a nice win, but investing in the Chicago founders during our real estate business also gave me the thesis that I have today, which is look for the best founders I can, invest in them as early as possible, focus in Chicago, and holistically support them forever. And that's this company after that. And so really Lofty has turned into a community and a platform that I use to support the 160 plus founders at the 90 plus companies that I've invested in. About 80% of those are here in Chicago. So there are some that sneak through from outside of Chicago. I mean, I have one that the founder is actually from Ireland. So it's kind of gone all over the place, but really focused here in Chicago. And about 75% of the companies are led by underrepresented founders, meaning there's at least one founder that doesn't look like me. So today, Lofty is really this community, very Chicago focused, very founder and entrepreneurship focused, but we do a lot, and it has been it's been this focus of how do we help grow Chicago from an economic, using entrepreneurship and startups as an economic engine. And one of the things that I've realized is there aren't enough founders there aren't enough investors to write these first checks when I'm writing checks. Because when I make an investment, first thing I do is I want to share that investment with other co-investors, and there just aren't enough potential co-investors out there. So I'm trying to build more now, and that's the next evolution of Lofty, which is Lofty Angels, and it's literally open sourcing my 26 years of angel investing experience by hosting, similarly to what we're doing now. I don't call them podcasts per se, but it's like live recorded Zooms that I host with other early stage investors, some local, some outside, people from like Combinator, et cetera. And then we just give this content away. And the goal is to help people that are what I call angel curious start learning what angel investing is. And then if they become interested and they want to start writing checks, then I send them to places where they can write checks. So it's awesome. That's what Lofty is today.
Yeah. And I've attended some of those sessions and they're really good. And it's amazing the kind of work that you're doing to break in more of this early stage capital. Because like you said, it's a big deal. It's hard to get a business off the ground, let alone get it off the ground without capital. And you're opening up opportunities for founders that may not have taken this route, if not for your early support.
I was just going to say one comment on this. This is really important. When you say you're a first check angel, it's important for people to realize you want to be the first check, but not the last check. And the range that I invest at is 10 to 100,000. And even if I invest at the top of that range, no first round is $100,000. And I'm typically not investing at the top of that range. So when I make that investment, I want to share it with other investors, and so there just aren't enough. And so I'm not trying to like monetize this Lofty Angel community. Some of those angels can potentially matriculate into a syndicate that I created a couple years ago, but that's a very, very small. It's about the upside that I get from that syndicate is probably about 3% of my overall upside that I'm going to see, because I do so much in direct investing and I get just like the small carry across these syndicate deals. So it's not about monetizing. I want to make sure there's enough top of funnel angels that can invest in all these companies I invest in, so that my 10 or 100,000 or anything in between ends up being able to have an exit at some point. And that's just really, my self-serving goal here is just to be able to make sure the rounds close and the founders get the capital they need to get to what I say from 0 to 1. And once they get from 0 to 1, it's a lot easier for them to get the, 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. It's just the initial pre-seed angel kind of round is very hard for these founders, especially in Chicago and other Midwest locales.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think this ties into the other thing that we're here to talk about is Chicago politics. Because I've noticed that you've become a bit more active in the political community. You've even issued a letter to the mayor through Cranes, I believe, which is a major business publication here in Chicago. And this is
Yeah,
only like a month or two into him getting elected. And
yeah.
I think one thing you've highlighted is like the impact that politics has on economics and that effect on entrepreneurs and the desirability of Chicago to be a place to build a new company. So
hmm
like what made you feel politically motivated, and what's happening in that world for you?
I don't want to speak for other people in tech and in Chicago entrepreneurship, investors, et cetera, but I'll speak for myself. I hate politics. Like,
Okay.
really have tried to avoid politics my entire life. I vote, but I'm not a historically. I'm not a very like politically outspoken kind of person. That a little bit evolved over the Trump era, like
Yeah.
leading up to Trump's election, through his reign of terror, as I will call it. Um, I just became more of in protest of Trump, and I have family members that are in support of Trump, and they go, why do we have to get political? And I don't consider that to be political. I just consider that to be a good American citizen speaking up against tyranny and a self-identified dictator. So
Sure.
that is probably the beginning of where I started flexing more of what some people would consider to be a political muscle, but I'd never really looked at that as political. And we had lots of conversations during COVID about this kind of stuff on
Yeah.
Clubhouse. Shifting now into local politics, which I have really never cared about, like, at all. It's just not something that I've, like, I will vote for. There's actually a great Chicago startup that I'm not an investor in called Ballot Ready. And they're fantastic. I think anywhere in the country you can use them to help look, down ballot is very confusing. I was just
Yeah.
using it in my early voting I did this week for the Chicago primary right now that we're in, and it's super helpful. But I've never really like cared or paid attention. What forced me to pay attention is the companies that I've invested in, and again, I've invested in 90 plus companies in Chicago. That's not including the stuff I did before. This is really just over the past decade,
Yeah.
and 2/3 of those I've done since COVID, which is a lot. So 60 plus companies in the past 4 years.
Yeah.
Those founders in a post-COVID world are A, thinking about leaving Chicago, and or B, having a challenging time recruiting people to come here and just finding talent here now because so many people are moving.
Yeah.
Because in a post-COVID world, it has never become easier to switch between different locales. There's
Sure.
almost zero switching costs for young people, Gen Z, millennial, et cetera, especially if you don't have families, you're single, you're renting.
Yeah.
There's incredible flexibility for knowledge workers and entrepreneurs today that just did not exist pre-COVID, and so much of that is new to the world, and I think everybody's been taking the past couple of years to really figure this out. We still haven't really figured this out, but the political world is totally they don't realize this at all. So the article that open letter that I wrote in Cranes, which by the way I got crickets. There was only one local politician that reached out, which is
Okay.
very frustrating. I was very appreciative of Gil Villegas, who's the alderman for the 36th ward in Chicago. He reached out and we had a great conversation. I've built a little bit of a relationship with him, and I've enjoyed getting to know him. But when I was sharing more detail to my letter, he said, "This is totally none of us are thinking about this. This is not on our radar." And the core of what my message to the mayor is look, where the new mayor was, as you said, just like maybe a month into his uh, being in City Hall. Um, Founders are asked, everybody in society post COVID is asking themselves a lot of questions, and a very big one is, why do I live in this city?
Yeah.
I could be anywhere right now. I can be a digital nomad. I could be nowhere, nowhere and everywhere at the same time, like literally driving around in a van and just parking into cities across your trip across the country. I actually have founders that are doing that right now.
Okay.
So they're asking themselves, why am I here? And if I don't have a good answer, then why stay here? And the
Yeah.
challenge that Chicago has is we're just not competitive to a lot of peer cities now. And that's not just Chicago. You've got New York, San Francisco, LA, a lot of cities that are struggling to stay competitive to the upstarts like the Miamis, the Austins, the Nashvilles, and a lot of the Sun Belt. I mean, Chicago, like one of the things it's actually ironic about Chicago that some people don't like. I actually appreciate the weather. I lived
Yeah,
in
the weather's
Scottsdale for
great.
50. Yeah, I like the seasons, and I actually kind of like that the weather gets horrible in the winter. And
Yeah.
there's a sort of not kidding answer to this. If you can take Chicago winters, you've automatically got grit.
Yeah.
And so I use that a little bit as a filter. I mean, spending 15 years in a place where everybody lived there because it was too cold somewhere else, mostly like here in Minnesota or Indiana or something. I just always thought that was kind of a ridiculous reason to leave somewhere or move somewhere else. Is just it's too cold. But anyway, if you live in Chicago and you can take the cold weather, then you've inherently got some degree of grit. But
Yeah.
that is definitely not something that is attracting people to Chicago. It's something they maybe tolerate. There are other problems that we have here that we have to address: our taxes, our crime. Actually, let me reorder that: crime, taxes, fiscal. And that's what I tried to outline in this open letter to to the mayor. Uh, it's one thing for us to have those problems when people are very sticky, but when switching costs for people to leave from one place to another are near zero, we got problems. And I'm seeing
Yeah.
that. So I think I'm effectively the tip of the spear, the tip of the tip of the spear, because I'm writing these really, really early checks. And if I'm seeing our founders at the earliest stages leave, then that's our next generation of hopefully the big Fortune 500 companies and the big Grubhubs. The founder of
Yeah.
Grubhub, Mike Evans, recently wrote this book. I'm an investor in his
Sure.
next company, and thankfully he's still
Oh,
here.
nice.
But some of the founders that are going to be the next, hopefully, Grubhub are already left or considering leaving, and so we need to put our politicians on notice that we can't continue flying the plane directly into the ground and just expect people are going to pay more taxes, deal with more crime, whether perception or real. And there's a lot of evidence that it is real. It's a real problem. So it's pulled me in a way that I wasn't expecting, and that really happened about a year ago
Okay.
when I started trying to speak up more, just before the election, leading into the election, and now post election. We just got to bring a bigger light onto it.
And are there specific politicians or even policies that you're in support of or that you can discuss?
Um, yes. So about a year ago, I don't know if you were on that, but I did a Twitter space, which is like Clubhouse for those that don't know. Twitter Spaces, about the upcoming mayoral election, which
Yeah.
obviously is passed now, and that created a big discussion in the Chicago tech community around how politics is becoming more of a factor in ways that we weren't really used to pre-COVID.
Right.
And a couple of us have gotten together, and we're working on something I can't get into the details of yet. So it's a TBD, but we're very concerned about what's happening with Chicago politics. And so the small group of us are getting together and trying to back politicians that we feel have a pro growth and a pro Chicago lens. And we're not political. We're like very apolitical. I think, as you know, I'm a centrist independent. Um,
Yep.
I'm not like strong one, direction or the other. In fact, if anything, I'm trying to advocate we need to come more to the center,
Yeah.
as whether you're local or national or global politics. That's where compromise and people can share perspective and actually, coexist and get things done. This like swinging pendulum further and further from one extreme to the other is killing our country and now our city. So I'll give one quick example in this primary that we're in right now. And Chicago primary is really the general because we're so Democratic in Chicago and Cook County that whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to be the obvious pick for the general.
Yeah.
So we're backing a state's attorney that's running for Cook County state's attorney that I think is going to help fix a lot of the problems we've had under Kim Foxx, who's been
Okay.
she's retiring after 8 years as Cook County state's attorney, and it's not been good for Chicago's crime. So Eileen O'Neill Burke is fantastic. We've hosted a fundraiser for her. This will already have happened by the time this goes live, but we're doing a
Sweet.
Twitter space this evening to talk a little bit more about why we support her and why we think her policies are they're also progressive. It's not like, lock people up and throw away the key or anything crazy like that. It's just we need to prosecute and make our streets safe in order for us as investors and the entrepreneurial community to do what we're trying to do over the long term, which is create economic opportunity and viability for the whole city. And that's not going to happen if the founders that I'm investing in, which I'm focusing dollars in Chicago, if those founders decide to leave or they can't build jobs and build companies here locally because they can't attract people here. So in order for us to do our job with economic development, we just need a steady foundation to build on top of. And right now we don't have that. So we need people like Eileen O'Neill Burke to win as Cook County State's Attorney. And then we're going to, look ahead to what future races are. But right now we're taking it one step at a time and not quite ready to announce. We will announce probably in the next month or two what we're working on. But it's really just bring the business community, and a little bit of focus as well with the tech community on supporting candidates that are pro-growth and want to help our city.
Yeah, and because my podcast is hardcore political, and we describe the government and bureaucratic configuration and the style of politics, I'll add this into the mix, and then we can start to talk more specifically. But for people that don't know, Chicago has somewhere around 2.8 or 2.9 million people in the city. The city is inside of Cook County. Cook County is probably 5.5 million people, but it's not the entire Chicagoland area. The entire Chicagoland area is closer to 10 million, but most of the clout and the political pressure and capital is inside of Cook County. Cook County has 24 cities, 1 town, and 111 villages. Again, Chicago is by far the largest city in Cook County. And then the municipal politics in Chicago are broken down into wards. There's 50 of them. Each ward has an alderman that represents the interest of that ward. One of the things that's come under criticism, because if you go west, this is a really old school political system, is the amount of power that aldermen have over like zoning regulations. So some people call them little mayors. You have a weak mayor in Chicago, but this mayor is still able to veto policies of the 50 aldermen. But the aldermen, if they would like to veto back, all they need is 2/3 of the aldermen to support that opposition to the veto of the mayor. So it's basically like 35 votes, and they can overrule the mayor on most policies. And then again, people are surprised at how much power mayors have in Chicago, because Chicago has an executive branch, which isn't very common for city politics. The other thing is that the state's attorney, like in Colorado, we call that a district attorney, but we have judicial districts, whereas it sounds like state's attorneys are aligned with counties. So Cook County has the second highest caseload in the entire United States. The only judicial district that has more caseload, we already know this, is New York City and its surrounding boroughs. So second most caseload, which means that Cook County processes somewhere around 2.2 million cases a year. I'm going off the top of the head, by the way. And the thing with these states' attorneys is that they do something that's very different from a lot of other cities and counties. Usually traffic violations and non-felony crimes are prosecuted at the municipal level, but not in Chicago. What we would prosecute in Colorado at the municipal level is prosecuted at the county level. So the county court, this state attorney that sits inside of this judicial district in Cook County, this court presides over the most petty crimes and the most violent crimes. The district attorney's office in Chicago has 700 prosecutors underneath it. It's a massive office, 1,100 employees. And people need to remember, and my editor is drawing all these visuals now and connecting all these maps, but Chicago has had very poor relationship with its law enforcement. So in the last 4 years, Chicago PD has lost 3,600 people and only been able to rehire about 1,600. So the law enforcement agency has a massive shortage. And in many cases, it only is able to catch somewhere between 17 and 19% of all the criminal activities that take place that they receive a call for. And I've listened to the radio traffic and looked at the 911 and all these different things. And Chicago can't respond to like 75% of the calls that come in, and it experiences massive delays, even for homicides, gun crimes, robberies. Basically, you can rob somebody in Chicago and it's like you're not going to get caught. You could do it 5 deep with guns. You could steal a Toyota Corolla with 5 guns, which is a bad calculation, but it happens, tens or hundreds of times in the city of Chicago. And in the city, let's say you have 3 million people, the amount of cops that the city has is somewhere around 3,500, whereas in Washington, D.C., which is much smaller than Chicago, you have the same, you have the similar size law enforcement, 3,700 cops, but the population is only 750,000. New York City, who has maintained an incredible relationship with their law enforcement through Black Lives Matter and actually hired a former police captain as their mayor, has 24,000 police officers. So when we think about the state's attorney, they have to interact with the law enforcement, who's the front line of pulling the criminals in. And then you have the Department of Corrections and these other bureaucratic bodies. Now, a lot of people didn't like Lori Lightfoot, even though I still think she's awesome. And a lot of people don't like Kim Foxx, who's going to be retiring, which is why this seat is open and O'Neill Burke is running and others. Some of the criticisms I heard for Kim Foxx is that she decided to loosen the amount of crimes that get prosecuted, get rid of cash bail, and kind of has been more of an activist for her version of reform. So okay, knowing all these stats and facts that you already know, this is your community and I'm standing in it. What do you think about Kim Foxx and, Brandon Johnson specifically? What's going to be different about Eileen Burke, in your opinion, if you have thoughts?
Well, first thing is, far more about the system. I mean, the stats that you just threw out were incredible and very helpful to give context there. One of the biggest problems that Kim Foxx is created is lowering the tolerance for felonies in retail theft, going from what the law is from $300 to $1,000, and it's enabled a criminal enterprise in Chicago. And people talk about, some forms of violent crime are down, and some forms are. There's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of details, there's a lot of stats, and you can cut a lot of this stuff a million different ways. But retail theft is way up in the city at the same time as post-COVID, people don't want to really come down to the city anyway. So when they're coming down and witnessing major thefts that are happening on Michigan Avenue, which, if you don't live in Chicago, Michigan Avenue is one of the top retail destinations in the world, not just in Chicago or the US, but literally in the world. Our vacancy levels on Michigan Avenue are at all-time highs in terms of massive retailers leaving because there's not enough demand, foot traffic demand at the same time, you've got all of this theft that's happening. So they're having costs that are going through the roof. So there've been a lot of problems on Kim Foxx's watch.
And just to highlight this, what Kim Foxx did was if the theft exceeded $300, it was a felony. She moved it to if it exceeded $1,000, it's a felony. So anything under $1,000 is a misdemeanor, which in a lot of cases means you don't even go to jail if you even get caught at summons and release. And then for everyone listening, I'm 2 blocks off of the Magnificent Mile, Michigan, that we're talking about. So
and that's just per person. They'll have 5, 10, 20 people that will mob a store and wipe it out.
Every week, by the way, every single week, this style of crime happens on Michigan Avenue. And it's not just your local retailers, it's your LVMH brands, it's your Bergdorf's, your Nordstrom's, it's all the major retailers and everyone in between.
They've been hit and re-hit. So that's been a real problem. You touched on a point that I think is interesting. This new no cash bail. I've been mixed on it. I think that the optics of it have actually been worse than if you implement this correctly, which I think, and I've listened to Eileen a number of times now. I think she's going to implement this correctly. It actually makes more sense. The purpose of violent, it's really important that it's implemented correctly. And she's very, very aware that the prosecutors need to request the judge hold them or they won't be held. And that's this is a huge deal because a lot of these prosecutors are very young and don't realize like a lot of the nuance of this. And so Eileen she's gonna make sure that this is an educational push for these young prosecutors and make sure that they're able to request when it's appropriate. But it actually does make sense. Like just because somebody, like let's say you kill somebody, setting a bail for $1 million, like what's really the point of that? If you have enough money and you can pay that, now you're out, right? Like it really should be more like, is this person a threat to society or are they a flight risk? And that actually makes more sense. So I'm not opposed to that. I'm just cautious about how it's implemented. And I think Eileen will implement this correctly. So I don't know that I don't want to speak about the other people that are running against Eileen. I just have a high degree of confidence that she's going to be able to implement this new program, I think, more effectively than anybody else, and certainly more effectively than Kim Foxx is capable of, in my opinion.
Yeah. So Kim Foxx is the first Black woman to be a state attorney in Illinois. Mm-hmm. I think is mind-boggling. And I think at a similar time, Lori Lightfoot was the first Black woman to be a mayor in
Chicago,
Chicago, which is still fascinating because technically the demographics of the community are some 30% Black, some 30% white, and everyone else. So it's a very mixed community demographically. But I feel like the city is more mixed, like maybe a 3 to 5 mile radius. And then there's a lot of Jim Crow infrastructure in place in Illinois because it's been around for a long time. So there is still a pretty extraordinary level of segregation where you have these like towns or small districts that are just Mexican, just Venezuelan, just Jewish,
Polish,
Polish,
Irish Catholic,
exactly, and a lot of working class across all ethnic and racial lines, because a lot of people don't realize that Chicago is the core of the Rust Belt, and everything spreads out from here. And when it comes to manufacturing, so I think I think like Kim Foxx was interesting from a progressive perspective because she was trying to pull levers that a lot of left-leaning political actors in Chicago think are creating inequity. Because if your law enforcement's understaffed, then the best thing to do is focus on poor and ethnic communities and pound on them. And Chicago PD's got just a rich history of being a violent police department. I mean,
Hmm.
shit, my building is named after a fraudster named George Streeter, right? And the neighborhood is named after him.
Streeterville,
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. Right. And
Yeah,
he's a fraudster. He stole land from people and made false land deeds on
right.
the lake. And, this is how he became famous. Uh,
150 years ago or whatever that was. It was a
oh,
very
yeah.
long time ago. Yes.
Plus
Yep.
all the mob history and
Hmm.
extreme corruption for municipal politics in Chicago. So, like, how do you balance out like trying to have like a equitable society with like a sustainable society? You've done something in investing that like almost very few people have stepped up and done, and you don't tout it a lot, so it shouldn't be understated. But can people apply the way you think about investing to like the judicial system or the police system and still be able to reduce crime?
It's a really interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. The way that I think about investing and the way that I apply, well, let me take a step further back for a second.
Yeah.
There were a couple of reasons why I chose Chicago to be my investing thesis. And a very good one is there is a filter in Chicago, and we have great founders. Let me take even a further step back. We have great people
Yeah.
that are that hit my four criteria. And I actually backed into these four criteria after looking at all the companies that I've invested in and the founders and having to back out what's the commonality, what is it that I look for in founders. And the only reason I even had to do that, because as an angel investor, I don't have LPs, limited partners, to report to. I'm investing my own capital. I can invest in somebody because I like the color of their shirt or
Yeah.
whatever reason I want. I mean, that's a ridiculous example, but angels don't report to anybody other than themselves. So if I want to teach people, which we started the talk about trying to open source and share more of how I do angel investing to more people, I can't teach them unless I understand myself what I'm looking for and what I'm doing and giving as an example. So when I did a post-mortem on the companies and thus the founders that I've backed, I realized that there are four criteria that are in high commonality amongst them and at very high degrees on each one of these. So I'll go through them very quickly. And this is stuff that I believe is just part of the fabric of Chicagoans in a lot of cases.
Okay.
And of course, there's a bell curve. Not everybody exists in high degrees in these, but I think it's very common here. So first is givers. I look for givers in the Adam Grant give and take sense. And if you haven't heard of Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist at Wharton. I guarantee that I've recommended his book more than anybody else on planet Earth other than Adam, because I give this example every time I talk about the founders I back. But
Sure.
I look for givers. Second, they have to be brilliant. Three, they have to be gritty, scrappy, able to do a lot with a little. Again, going back to the weather and filtering, people have like real grit in Chicago and real determination. And then the
Yeah.
fourth is what I call problem founder fit. So they have lived the problem, they deeply hate it, and they're agnostic to the solution, and they've got personal experience operating inside of the problem. So when I look at Chicago and I look at our population of Chicagoans, we are by definition entrepreneurs, even if they don't realize they are yet. And an individual, a Chicagoan, gets this like burr under their saddle that they just can't. It's like bugging them in whatever they work in a company and there's some problem. They go out and they try to solve it. And when they go and raise money, like that's when I start to come in. And so I think we're a city of smart, giving, caring problem solvers that really give a shit about Chicago and helping each other. And so, if I were going to give advice to our city elected officials, our police, I would say we all are in this together.
Yeah.
And this is an all boats rise or all boats sink scenario.
Yeah.
And we all need to stay in our lanes a little bit and like make sure that the trains are running on time, right? That
Yeah.
we've got safe streets and our taxes aren't scaring people away and looking for new ways that we can like this mansion tax, quote unquote, is going to kill our downtown city if this goes through. It's anyway. So
Mhm.
I guess In order for our citizens to want to stay here and do what they do well, which is help each other and solve
Yeah.
problems and hopefully build businesses and create opportunity for their fellow citizens to have jobs and to work together, et cetera, like just make sure that we are competitive as a city and enable the people that want to be here to stay here. And people want to be here. I mean, trust me, if you're already living in a city and a state that is as overtaxed as we are and have horrible, winters and all that, like people are here because they love it. But everybody has a breaking point, and at some point, other locales become interesting and attractive, and everybody has that point. And
Right.
I'm already seeing our founders leaving. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I'm happy to get
It
more
does.
in the weeds.
Yeah, it does. And like, what did you think when Ken Griffin decided to move Citadel out of here?
Absolutely not shocked at all. It's more of this is going to happen. And there are also some misnomers. When Ken left, he's gone.
Yeah.
He moved his one of my friends was at one of his holiday parties down in Miami over the holidays, and he is 100% gone. But that doesn't mean his entire team left. And in a post-COVID world, even these big companies, if some of them leave, some of them can stay. There is an office here. They don't call it their headquarters. So it's not like 100% of the group that was here left. We lost all of that tax base out of Illinois, but it's substantial. And I mean, he was the wealthiest Chicagoan or Illinoisan, I believe. And losing him to Florida and to Miami is certainly not a win for Chicago. There are more
Right.
of those that are going to happen, and there are warning shots that are being fired.
Wasn't CME Group threatening to leave?
I was just going to say the CEO of Duffy, the CEO of CME Group, said. In fact, I referenced that in the open letter that I wrote to the mayor in Cranes, and he wrote an article in Cranes about this. We can't afford losing I mean, CME stands for Chicago Mercantile Exchange.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Exactly.
if you lose a namesake that was born, the commodity pits and what really made Chicago famous and being at the core of our country in the financial markets with commodities, we're at risk of losing these companies if you try to transaction tax and all these things that are just
Yeah.
like crazy town. Right around the time when Brandon it was either right before he got elected or right after, there was this incredibly left wing proposal that went out that was literally titled "First We Get the Money," and it
Whoa.
was if you haven't seen this, look up "First We Get the Money." It
Okay.
was a proposal of a city income tax, a wealth tax, and that's where all this stuff has
Mm,
come from. Is
yeah.
even if that stuff's not ever implemented, which I don't know how it could even like constitutionally, like it would be very challenging to implement any of those. Just the fact
Right.
we're talking about those things, we're having conversations about things that are absolutely asinine, is
Yeah.
enough to scare away A, companies that might want to move here, and B,
Right.
founders that are thinking, well, why would I set roots in a place like this? Why don't I just move to Austin or Nashville or all these other locales that are much more business friendly, and the weather's not horrible,
Right.
So it's it's challenging.
Yeah, I mean,
Challenging.
this city taxes bags for behavior modification. So I don't even, now I have reusable bags. Yeah, because it doesn't make sense to pay 7 cents per plastic bag, which the retailers don't even get to keep that as a profit. It's a tax.
Right.
So they pass
It's
it through to
literally a
the.
tax. Yeah.
One thing people don't realize about Chicago is that it's almost the sixth largest economy on the planet. So it is one of the economies that the international system depends on. I mean, if it collapsed, the effect would be systemic.
Oh
And
yes.
then and then also Chicago is really one of two cities on the continent. Well, one of two cities here that in the U.S. that has a capital markets, actual legitimate
Hmm.
capital markets that bring
Hmm.
capital into the economy.
Hmm.
Uh, and then even Chicago, its GDP, some say is between 600 and 800 billion dollars. I mean, it's a lot of contribution. So I'm with you, Chris, that a lot of things need to change in Chicago politics, because what I hear is like a lot of people that live here are just great people and are not sure how to get a handle on all these political and bureaucratic
Hmm.
issues. So I think
Hmm.
it's great that you're speaking out and that you keep doing that, because I think it's going to encourage others in civic engagement, which is really important if we want to take the power back for ourselves instead of outsourcing it to these idiots.
I even struggle calling them idiots. Sometimes I go, God, these idiots. But I'm sure if you sat down, and this is not to call our mayor Brendan Johnson an idiot, but um,
Yeah,
I'm sure if I sat down with our mayor and had a heart-to-heart conversation, I would imagine that most of our philosophy and what we care about and what we're trying to do actually have pretty good alignment. They're
yeah,
just doing the absolute wrong things to get there. That
yeah,
you can't like flip switches and shift uh, generational inequity. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country, and that's created enormous challenges and problems for many groups in the city. And
mm,
I am very focused, as a lot of people are, in nonprofits and investors and real estate developers, on how do we fix these problems. But you
yeah,
can't. The city and our economy are not speedboats. It's an aircraft carrier, and this is
yeah,
a multi-decade, multi-generational approach that we really have to take. But we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. So let's solve the long-term challenges that our city has and really has created. But at the same time, we have to solve things like crime, taxes, and fiscal. And if we don't do that, we're just not going to be attractive. And the problem is, in a post-COVID world, there's no switching costs. And that was like
yeah.
really the thesis of the open letter that I shared with the mayor. And I really wish he would have reached out, because I think we could have had a productive conversation. And at this
Well, and
point,
also, Chris, obviously, like M Hub and MXD are like really cool because they
yeah.
bring new capital to
And Lofty
hard tech.
supports all of those. Is we give grants to all of these nonprofits in Chicago, like Matter, 1871, M Hub,
Yes,
et cetera.
and
So
and again, because we're at the core of the manufacturing, transportation, logistics
yeah,
sector,
yeah,
because of this, uh, it makes no sense for founders from Michigan or Ohio or Illinois to move to San Francisco to
right.
raise money for hard tech, robotics. Like Chicago has the potential to become the robotics capital. Uh, and I
Hmm.
think it should try to realize that, and it should make it to where it's not attractive to move to the Bay Area
Hmm.
because the local resources are
Hmm.
so good. And then I mean, I think this is where the kind of equity conversation comes in, because we know the Chicago public schools is struggling, but we know that this kind of work goes to people that go to a top 100 university and have
Hmm.
wealthier parents. So it's like, how
Hmm.
do we solve all these problems? But again, if the politicians would put their egos aside and be more practical and try to coordinate with the other departments and, uh, you know, just quit posturing and bullshitting people
Hmm.
and do more of like what your group is doing in tech, I think the city would function better and it would be more competitive. So I hope that you keep speaking out.
Again, this is part of what I tried to relay to the mayor and anybody that wanted to read the open letter, is that because I'm investing in the earliest stages of our founders in Chicago, and a huge percentage of the companies that I've invested in are backed by founders that don't look like me, that aren't straight white male. They could be female, BIPOC, LGBT. Um, we have and I'm not choosing founders based on them being underrepresented. I'm choosing the best founders in Chicago to invest in. It just so happens that we have such gritty, brilliant, awesome founders that also happen to not look like me in Chicago. And
Sure.
if we can invest in those founders, because they're going to build good companies, and my portfolio is doing very well, if we can continue to support those companies, help them get to fruition, they exit, we turn those founders that have now made an enormous amount of capital into angel investors, this creates a
Yeah,
very powerful flywheel. And that's what we're doing at Lofty. So, one of the things that I've also tried to do is not just inject capital into founders and open source my knowledge, but I'm also trying to teach the 160 plus founders I've invested in, those that want to learn what angel investing is, and remove the gate from, oh, now I've just made my 100 million. Now let's go learn angel investing. It takes a long time to learn. I'm trying to help
sure.
them learn and write small checks while they're still founders and while they're still
That's
building their
awesome.
companies. So
Yeah.
when they get that huge exit that we're all hoping they get to, and reap the rewards of that, they can start writing really big checks right off the bat directly on the cap table into our next generation of founders. And so that will actually fast forward us a little bit into getting real checks from founders who ultimately really write the best angel checks because they have empathy and understand and they can be more helpful. Not to say that other people shouldn't be angels. Everybody should be an angel if they want to do it and they have the qualifications and requirements and they have the capital for it. But founders just typically understand it better because they've been founders themselves. So again, politicians in Chicago, let's just give the entrepreneurs and the investors here the ability to invest and create the future that we want for our city. We're not going to be able to do that if we don't have a safe and economically viable home for them to live in and attract more of their employees too.
Yeah, and this city feels more dangerous to me than New York and Washington, D.C. And sometimes I'd rather be in Baltimore. And the threats feel persistent in this community. And I'm not a scared guy. I'm a Second Amendment guy, and I grew up with guns. But I'm not going to carry a gun in this city because this city's found a way to transfer unreasonable amounts of liabilities onto individuals that are law abiding to carry guns. But it's got a rich secondary market of illegal weapons pouring into it that are very easy to get. I wouldn't be surprised if the hood buys the guns and exchanges them on Facebook or Reddit or other forums under like code names. Who knows? Because I never see task forces in this city, and I never see gang unit. Like it's like the city is like got its hands tied behind its back, and I get it. Like crime went up. There was a spike because of the pandemic, and a lot of major cities are struggling. But to what degree?
Yeah.
And I think Black Lives Matter had a more significant impact in Chicago than it did maybe in New York because Chicago seems to have a wider kind of left wing, a more active left wing. But again, maybe that's a downside in politics, but it's incredible in arts and humanities because it's a very intellectual community. It's very
Yes.
artistic. It's very creative. It's very innovative. So, Chris, well, I want to have you on again, maybe in the next 3 to 6 months. Like when you can make your public announcement on what you're working on, come back
Yeah, and
and we'll
maybe I'll
discuss.
bring one of the other team members on as well because it is
Yeah,
my goal to not. Oh, I'm gonna make a quick point here. I am not interested in becoming super political. I don't want to know all the facts and details that you know because that's knowledge then that I can't have and maintain because I have very very small hard drive and I got to stuff that with the information of all of our founders that I work with and I'm doing this really for them because I want them to be able to stay here. I want them to be able to call Chicago home forever. I want them to build roots here and build businesses and enable those businesses to create jobs and economic development and economic opportunity. So I'm really doing this for them, and I'm trying as best I can to bring together people that have more knowledge than I do. I mean, that's kind of what my job is, anyways, of an investor. I'm not an expert in most of the companies that I invest in. I'm investing in people that are experts, and I'm trying to support and enable them to succeed. And in the same way, I'm trying to bring together people that do have knowledge and are able to affect change in our political system and in Chicago politics. It's not something that I ever want to be an expert in, but there is one thing that I have that a lot of people don't. I have independence. I do not have a boss. I'm not working in a company that if I speak up too loudly, I could get fired from. I can get canceled, or any of these challenges that a lot of people have. So it's almost a little bit my responsibility to step up and use my voice because I'm able to. And a lot of people aren't. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they have to say things off the record, and they have to say things in the shadows. I don't. If somebody wants to come at me, like, come at me, bro. I'm doing this out of a love for our city. I'm doing this out of a love for entrepreneurship, and I think it'd be a huge wasted opportunity for our city not to maintain and grow its reputation, not just nationally but globally, because we really have the best founders, in my opinion, in the whole country. That's why my thesis is Chicago.
Yeah, I agree. And this is not a copycat New York. So
Right.
After living here for a year and a half, this city stands on its own. It's got its own intellectual infrastructure, religious infrastructure, this is Chicago. It's not New York. So I'm with you, Chris, and anything I can do to help to empower your political activities, I'm on board for that.
Yeah, I love you, man. You're doing great stuff. I love all of your shows. I listen
Thank
to
you.
it. Every time you send me one of those, I'm always excited to dig in. You have the most fascinating. I'm completely humbled and surprised that I'd even be part of this this roster that you've built. But yeah, I'm happy to come back anytime, and maybe I can introduce you to some of the other people that are working on this that have far more knowledge in the weeds and nuance about
Chicago
host a
politics.
Panel.
I'll host you guys for a panel.
It sounds great.
Yeah, it'll be awesome.
Sounds great.
Appreciate you, Chris.